Hi, my name is Dr. Catherine Hughes from Crime Psych. In today's video, I'm going to be discussing hostage negotiation. Psychology has helped this area of policing become much more effective in recent years. Hostage situations involve taking a person captive for instrumental or tangible reasons. For example, the suspect might need the police or other authorities to meet specific demands for money, transport, and so on. In these events, the hostage or hostages are used as leverage to obtain other substantive goals. Negotiating with an offender when hostages are held usually comes under a broad term called crisis negotiation. The term crisis negotiation has been adopted in recognition of the variety of contexts where intervention might be needed by an officer. A crisis state has three main characteristics. The first one is the person in crisis behaves at an intense emotional and irrational level rather than at a rational thinking level in response to a situation that they perceive is overwhelming. Secondly, the situation has occurred within the past 24 to 48 hours. And third, the event is seen as a threat to one's psychological and/or physical well-being. A crisis generally occurs in four predictable stages: pre-crisis, crisis, accommodation negotiation, and resolution. In the pre-crisis stage, a person goes about his or her normal routine, unaware that there is actually a problem looming or an event looming. The crisis stage is characterised by very high emotions, very low rationality, and an inability to cope with a problem that is perceived by that person to be a serious threat. In this stage, the frustration and the tension increase as a result of conflict and the person being unable to deal with the challenge using previously effective coping mechanisms or skills. It's often at the start of the crisis stage that police negotiators or crisis responders are called upon to intervene. By the accommodation negotiation stage, the individual begins to work through the crisis by being receptive to suggestions and thinking a little bit more clearly about resolving the situation. In this stage, the emotional intensity decreases and there then is a shift towards more productive problem solving. The resolution stage involves working out an acceptable solution and therefore ending the crisis. This final stage results in the person who's been experiencing the crisis to have renewed equilibrium and renewed stability. Any crisis negotiation tactic ought to begin with listening, and that's a really important thing. We need to listen to the person who's in crisis. If an offender is holding a hostage or hostages or is threatening to hurt themselves or somebody else, then they're likely to be in a heightened emotional state. There is absolutely no way you're going to be able to go from you telling somebody to stop to them stopping straight away. They're in a very highly charged emotional state, and anybody who's trying to negotiate with them will need to adopt an approach with empathy and understanding and listening. One model for crisis and hostage negotiation is set out by the FBI's behavioural stairway model. This model follows a 5-step process which they claim can get a person who's in crisis, such as holding hostages, to seeing your point of view and to change what they're doing. The 5 stages are active listening, empathy, rapport, influence, and behaviour change. And this is based on a problem-solving approach. That first stage, active listening, that encourages the negotiators to listen to a person's story and to make them aware that you're listening to them. Examples of this could be short phrases said such as, "I see," "Sure," "I understand." You could also repeat back to somebody what they've said to you. For example, if they tell you about a problem that they have or something that they're upset about, you could paraphrase that back to them by saying, "So what you're saying is," and then repeat it back in a very slightly different worded way. Most people experiencing a crisis have a desire to be heard and understood. Active listening attends to this need, and it's a critical thing to do for developing a relationship that will ultimately lead to a behavioural change and the resolution of an incident. Active listening is made up of core and supplemental groupings. The core group consists of mirroring, paraphrasing, emotional labelling and summarising. The supplemental group consists of effective pauses, as in silences, minimal encourages, open-ended questions and statements. Mirroring refers to repeating the last few words or the gist of what the person in crisis is saying. Mirroring allows the person's specific concerns to be firmly established. Using mirroring helps to ensure that the discussion focuses on the person in crisis rather than on the negotiator. Emotional labelling identifies the emotions of the subject or the person in crisis. Even if the negotiator initially misidentifies an emotion, this effort at least demonstrates to the person in crisis that the negotiator is trying their hardest to understand their situation, which tends to diffuse some of the emotionality of it. Examples of emotional labelling include: you sound angry, you seem frustrated, I hear frustration in your voice. And summarising allows the negotiator to restate the content and the emotion that's been expressed so far within their conversation. It reflects the effort of the negotiator to view the situation from the perspective of the person in crisis. The second stage, empathy, requires the negotiator to show that they understand how the person is feeling in their current predicament. They could show this by saying phrases such as, I understand how you're feeling, I can appreciate that would be a difficult position to be in, I can see why that must be hard for you, and so on. Empathy is a natural byproduct of effective active listening. It implies an identification with and an understanding of another's situation, feelings, and their motives. The negotiator uses empathy to see through the eyes of the person in crisis and to absorb some of that tension. In crisis interventions, the goal isn't to feel sorry for that person in crisis, but it's to establish a relationship through effective communication. These first two stages are aimed at building up trust, showing the person that they're being listened to, and that is a really important step. The more a person feels listened to, the more they'll be willing to communicate. Once the person in crisis feels that the person that they're talking to understands how difficult their situation is, the more likely they are to trust them. The third stage, rapport, is aimed at getting that person to trust you. Empathy is what you feel, rapport is when you feel it back. They start to trust you. Once rapport has been developed, the person in crisis is more likely to listen to and accept what the negotiator has to offer. At this stage, the negotiator, in collaboration with the person in crisis, begins to build themes that can bring about a possible end to that crisis. The fourth stage, influence, is aimed at working with a person to find a solution to their problem. Once they feel listened to and understood, they're more likely to listen to any suggestions of how they can work to get out of that situation or to change that situation. The fifth and final stage is behavioural change. This is the all-important stage where the person in crisis changes their behaviour. For example, they might come out with their hands up or release some of their hostages. Obstacles to reaching that final stage are usually, firstly, the negotiator moving too quickly or too rapidly through the first stages, or secondly, omitting stages in some sort of misguided effort to end the crisis, although prematurely, through problem solving. Again, the key to behaviour change in crisis negotiation is achieving a positive relationship between the negotiator and the person in crisis by active listening, empathy, rapport, and behavioural influence strategies and tactics. At this final stage, the person in crisis will then likely to follow the negotiator's suggestions to the extent that the negotiator has tasked them with in the previous stages, and all those have been effectively carried out. And that model can be used in a wide variety of situations, and many components have been long established in therapeutic interventions and treatments with people. I personally think that it is a very valuable skill to learn, even if you don't plan on becoming an expert hostage negotiator. You never know when these skills might be of use. In today's busy world, we can generally feel unseen, and people don't talk about mental health and suicide until they're at crisis point. Practice role-playing with friends and with family members. I do hope that you've enjoyed this video and that you have learned something new. I hope that you're never in a situation where you need to use these skills. Thanks for watching though. Bye for now.